You're going to want to know these facts to get the most out of your sharpening station. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today I'm going to share with you 6 facts that you need to know to get the most out of your sharpening station. I get asked these questions all the time via email and comments. People are always asking me these particular questions. That's how I know this information really isn't shared that much out there. Well, today it's time to share this information. Let me start with an overview. First of all, we're going to talk about the one-way Wolverine system today. I also have the Robert Sorby Pro Edge sharpening system, and there's also the Tormek sharpening systems that are out there as well. I'm going to focus today on the one-way Wolverine system. Now, why do I use that one more than anything? Well, I'm human and I'm comfortable. I hate admitting that, but it's true. As a human, we basically go through and whatever we learn initially is usually what we stick with. And I learned using the one-way system and I got very comfortable with it. I also use the Robert Sorby Pro Edge system. I'm not going to cover that in this video, but both of these systems are covered thoroughly in my tool sharpening and shaping course, which you might want to check that out over my website. Today we're going to focus on the one-way Wolverine system, and I'm going to show you some things or share some common questions and the answers to those in this video. Before we dive into those facts, I need to address something else as well. When we first start turning or we first get our lathe, it's very common for people to think, well, I'm going to spend all that money on the lathe. Okay, I'll get a few tools and that's it. I don't want to spend any more money. Only to realize that, oh wait, I need a sharpening station. And a lot of people try to get by cheap on the sharpening station, and I get it, I understand. I like being frugal. If I don't have to spend money on something, I won't. But guess what? A sharpening system is not where you want to go save money, because the sharpening system is actually as important as your lathe. You might be thinking, well, how can that be? Well, your sharpening station is going to serve you, and it's going to make all of your turning on your lathe that much more enjoyable. If you do not have sharp tools, you're going to have a miserable time at the lathe, and you're probably going to be one of those people that put your lathe on Facebook Marketplace to sell because you just didn't get into it. And I don't want that for you. I want you to enjoy wood turning. That's why I do all these videos. You really need a good sharpening station that is going to be on par with your lathe as far as importance. And that also is going to mean you need to spend a little bit of money to invest in it. The good news is that once you put together a good sharpening system, you're pretty much set for life. Your sharpening system will last you your entire life. It's that important. So just consider that if you didn't really put this into your budget of things to purchase when you set up your lathe. It is as important as your lathe. Let's jump right in with one of the most asked questions that I get. That is, do I need a slow speed grinder? I've got my shop grinder. Can I just use that? Well, if your shop grinder is turning under 1800 RPMs and apparently you're not using it as a grinder in your shop anymore, then yeah, you can use that. But you're really going to want to set up a new slow speed sharpening system starting with a slow speed grinder. Basically, most slow speed grinders are around 1800 RPMs or slightly less. Now, why the slow RPMs? Well, I'm going to be recommending that you use CBN wheels, and CBN wheels really do not need to be turning faster than 17 or 1800 RPMs. They are amazing flywheels, and the kinetic energy of a high-speed regular grinder is too much for CBN wheels. We'll talk a little bit more about the CBN wheels in a minute, but just know that we do not want a fast, regular, or traditional grinder, shop grinder, as our sharpening grinder. Instead, we need a slow speed grinder. And these machines are around $100 US. Again, this is an investment and most likely will last your entire lifetime if it's taken care of. So go ahead and get a slow speed grinder to start, and do not use a traditional high speed or high RPM shop grinder as the grinder for your sharpening system. CBN wheels or oxide wheels, Well, you might have guessed that I'd be addressing this. Why? Because everybody asks, because there's such a huge cost difference. Basically, the oxide wheels many times come free with your grinder. They'll have them right there in the box. I recommend getting rid of them. I know you hate to hear that, and there are plenty of turners out there that sharpen with them and have great results. I'm going to make the argument that the CBN wheels, even though they cost a lot up front, are actually cheaper than oxide wheels. Let me explain. First of all, the oxide wheels, yes, are very cheap, but that cheapness has a lot of trade-offs. Number one, you're going to remove a lot of material from that wheel very quickly. That wheel is going to change shape over the time, which is going to change the dynamics and the profile of your bowl gouge. Also, the oxide wheels will have grooves in them, so you're going to have to dress them. There's a special tool that's used to dress and flatten out the surface of the oxide wheels. Oxide wheels also can break, and when they break, they can disintegrate and go flying everywhere. That's why you must use the safety guard with your grinder over any oxide wheels at all times. All of that because they're cheap. Now, on the other hand, the CBN wheels are a lot more expensive initially. However, they do not consume and grind down as much material as the oxide wheel. They never need to be dressed, they never change size, and they never need to be replaced if they're taken care of. And by taking care of them, you essentially need to put nothing other than high-speed steel or other turning tools in there that are not carbide. You do not put carbide steel against a CBN wheel. But other than that, that's all you need to do, and they will last your entire life. Now, let me tell you why I'm so passionate about this. A long time ago, I went to a pretty well-known woodturner's weekend workshop, and they had sharpening stations set up with oxide wheels. Well, they had several sharpening stations, and it sort of makes sense because if you had to set up multiple sharpening stations with CBN wheels, it gets rather expensive. So these sharpening stations had oxide wheels. Luckily, we were also using their bowl gouges and not my bowl gouge. Do you remember in grade school when you would be bored or you were just looking to play around and you would walk to the back of the classroom and you'd put your number 2 pencil into the pencil sharpener and you would turn that crank and sharpen the pencil and you would just grind the pencil down to nothing? Well, that is what I experienced going from my CBN wheels that I'm used to using to the oxide wheels when I was sharpening my bowl gouge. I was shocked how much material was being ground right off the nose of my bowl gouge. I think I reduced the bowl gouge by 1 inch in that one weekend. It was completely amazing to me how much material was ground off using the oxide wheels. We do not need to remove that much material, and the CBN wheels do not remove that much material. The CBN wheels elongate the life of your bowl gouge. So when you look at the really cheap oxide wheels and you compare that to what 2, 3, 4, 5 bowl gouges cost, you can see that the CBN wheels initially cost a lot, but are actually cheaper in the long run. You're not going to pay for any more wheels, you're not going to buy multiple oxide wheels, and your bowl gouges will last much longer. If you look at the cost of the bowl gouge you bought and think about multiplying that many times, you can see how quick this adds up. So I highly recommend using the CBN wheels over the oxide wheels. Now, another thing I forgot to mention is the oxide wheels release a lot of extra dust particles into the air while you're sharpening. You need to keep your respirator on at all times, whether you're sharpening with an oxide wheel or with CBN wheels. There is metal dust. Wood dust is horrible. Metal dust is many multiples of horrible. You do not want that down in your lungs. So be sure that no matter what wheels you're using over the sharpening station, you have your respirator on at all times. Even if you just walk over there for a quick little tune-up to sharpen that edge, put your respirator on. You'll be thanking me years down the road, and it'll just be a better experience. So wear your respirator. 6-inch versus 8-inch. Yeah, size does matter. And again, we're kind of getting into that territory of, can I do this cheaper? Well, I wish I could say yes, you could use the 6-inch ones and have no issues. The problem with the 6-inch wheels is that their diameter is smaller and you will start seeing concave shapes on the bevel of your bowl gouge. When you have a concave, that means you've got a protruding sharp edge, which is going to be prone to catches. When you have that concave also, you don't have a good flat bevel to give you support when you're making your bevel riding cuts. So you're going to see a lot more catches if you're using a 6-inch wheel and you're getting an indentation or concave curve on the surface of your bevel. So you really want to use just 8-inch wheels. That means your grinder should be set up for 8-inch wheels and you should be purchasing 8-inch CBN wheels, and you will be much better off. You'll have a better, flatter bevel that will give you great results. Stay away from the 6-inch wheels. What grit CBN wheels should I get? Well, great question. And unfortunately, I hear stories of people purchasing 400 and 1,000 grit wheels. I don't even know where you get a 1,000 grit CBN wheel. I'm sure they're out there. And I cringe because I think, oh, you're going to spend so much time at your sharpening station. This is a little counterintuitive. We definitely want sharp, good, crisp cutting edges on our tools, but we don't have to have grits that match what we do in woodworking. In woodworking, it's common, we know we want to get to a smooth wood, final wood surface, so we go to 320 and 400, maybe even 600, and we think in our mind, well, that's what we're looking for. That's not what we need when we're sharpening our tools. Now, we cover this in much more detail in my tool sharpening course, but essentially, we are not polishing some type of show blade or a sword or something that's going to be on display, and we're not going to try to go through all these grits and make something that just is mirror-like, has a mirror-like surface on it. Instead, what we're doing is very utilitarian and very functional. So the two wheels that I use are my 80 grit and my 180 grit. The 80 grit is used for shaping tools. It is the most coarse, obviously, and it is going to quickly move through material and help me shape a tool the way I need it. Once that tool is shaped, then I'm only using my 180 grit wheel to sharpen that tool. Now, you might be thinking, well, 180 grit is really coarse. Are you going to have a sharp edge on that or not? Well, the sharp edge is definitely there. You can actually see the striations from the CBN wheel on the bevel of the bowl gouge, and guess what? That's fine. Now, again, if I were doing some type of show blade, well, I'm not going to want to see those streaks in there. So I would just keep going through all the grits until it looked like a mirror. But that's not what we're doing. We're making a tool here that is going to be functional, it's going to be used, and we're going to use it rather quickly. There's a good chance I have to go back over there in 5 or 10 minutes to do it again. So there's no point at all in going to a really high fine grit rate. And besides, I only have 2 wheels on my sharpening station. It's not as if I'm going to go through all these different grits. 180 works great. It sounds like it's really coarse, but it works great for bowl turning. And you're going to be set up with that wheel, and that's all you really need. Now, people that have like 400 grit wheels, the problem is they're going to go back to that station and they're going to spend probably 2 or 3 times longer trying to clean up that bevel and create a nice clean edge. Yes, the sides of their bevel are going to look a lot smoother than the 180, but who cares what it looks like? It's how it cuts on the lathe. And just remember, if you were to lay out the distance that your gouge is actually cutting, we're talking about many, many, many miles or kilometers. You're going to actually be grinding the edge of that against the wood in just one bowl. If you just take a 10-inch bowl and you think about and you do the math on that, how many times in the rotation speed of that, you're literally, it's like dragging your tool across a piece of wood for miles or kilometers. And it's going to wear quickly. So you have to go back to that sharpening station. We're not trying to create a polished, beautiful showpiece. We're just sharpening it and bringing that cutting edge back to a sharp state, and then we're going to sharpen. That's why I use the 80 and the 180. It's that simple. Now, another question I get asked often is the side profile on my CBN wheels. Why is one square and one is rounded? Well, it's just a personal preference. I decided to get my 80 grit wheel with a hard 90-degree edge on it so that I can do the sides of certain tools for scraping and that. And quite honestly, I don't use it that much. Now, I got the round over edge on my 180 grit wheel, which is my main sharpening wheel. I've seen a couple instances where the bowl gouge can actually get caught on the side of the wheel and get dropped down and knocked out of the jig. And it usually happens on a sharp edged wheel. And whoever's doing the sharpening is not paying attention, and that gouge is kind of drifting off the side. So the round over edge helps eliminate that or prevent that a little bit. That was kind of my thinking on that. But essentially, it's just personal preference. Purchase what you can afford and what'll work for you. But just remember that the profile is not as critical as just using CBN wheels versus oxide wheels. The gouge protrusion from the jig is a fixed variable. And as a matter of fact, that is the variable that makes this whole system consistent. No matter how long your bowl gouge is, the protrusion coming off of the jig is what is always the same. I use a gauge. It's actually a homemade gauge. And actually, I have the plans for this gauge on my website. Now, I do a 2-inch protrusion, and that's about 5 centimeters. But I do a 2-inch protrusion for one reason. That's so that I can get these long swept back wings without the jig itself getting in the way. The Wolverine system that recommends that you have a protrusion of 1 3/4 inch, and that'll work fine, but I found that when I would drop the sides down to do these longer wings, I was continuously hitting the jig on the wheel as well. So I prefer to do a 2-inch protrusion or extension from the front of the jig when I'm sharpening. It's all up to you. You can do whatever distance works best for you. I probably wouldn't go any longer than 2 inches, but the big rule of thumb is just be consistent. Don't use multiple distances. Use one gauge for your tools, because you'll forget. If you're doing one at 1 3/4 inches and you're doing another one at 2 inches, there's a good chance you're going to forget that you have it set up that way, and then you're going to put it into this jig and you're going to sharpen and you're going to see, well, this is getting ground, but that's not getting ground. What's happening? Well, that's probably because the extension from the jig has changed. So do yourself a favor, make a really nice gauge, and there's a little secret inside this one too. You can see it on the plans on my website. Essentially, what this is going to do is going to make everything consistent, and consistency is the key here. As long as you're keeping all your settings consistent, you will have consistent results. You'll have a consistent sharpening edge all the time, and that's what we're shooting for. So just remember, if it's 2 inches or 1 3/4 inches, it doesn't really matter. You just need to make sure that you're consistent with it. Okay, so those are some of the most asked questions I have about the sharpening station. Hopefully these answers help you out. Now it's time for some bonus. Now, one of the things that I do, again, talking about consistency, I pretty much only sharpen my bowl gouges to the 55-degree bevel swept backed bowl gouge shape. And I pretty much have my jig set up just for doing the 55-degree swept back bowl gouge. Now, when I do need to turn a different profile and I need to adjust my jig, I have a little secret for getting right back to the 55-degree bevel distance so that everything moves smoothly and I maintain my consistency. That secret is I scribe a little line on the tubing for the extension that comes out of the jig right where it meets the base of the Wolverine system. That little scribed line is very precise. It's right on the edge of it. I actually used my dividers, which I use to mark the tenon on my bowls frequently. I used that sharp, hardened point to scribe an edge in that actual tubing, and that way I can quickly get right back to where I was. Now, I still need to use my protractor and check and make sure that the bevel on the nose of the tool is 55 degrees, but 99% of the time, that little mark gets me right back to where I need to be. Here's another great tip. Once you have the leg set to exactly where you want it to sharpen the way you choose. Now, keep in mind, you can sharpen any way you want. I like doing the 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge because I can say it really well now after all these videos. No, I like it for a lot of other reasons. I like the way that it cuts and the way I can do basically all 4 turning cuts with it. This jig, the leg needs to be set in the right position for this to work. Once you have that set, a great thing to do is use pliers and tighten that set screw so that it's not going anywhere, because that little booger will loosen up, and before you know it, you're putting all kinds of weird profiles on your tool you didn't even realize was happening. And as a matter of fact, that was loose. I thought I was just gonna show you what I was doing, but it was actually loose. So it's good to tighten this and keep it that way. Now, I've heard of turners that maybe aren't as frugal as some other turners that actually purchase multiple jigs and have them set for various tool profiles, and they'll mark what it is. So maybe they would mark 55 degrees on this, and maybe they have another one at 40 or 45 or whatever, and they will permanently tighten those. And I even heard of people putting a little spot weld on there, so this thing will not move. It is fixed in that position. And if you've tinkered around with trying to get this leg just in the right spot and you've readjusted it 150 times, I can understand where somebody would be tempted to just weld this thing in one spot. But keep in mind, you're gonna need multiple jigs if you plan on doing multiple tool profiles. It's just food for thought. But a great thing to do is take a little bit of extra time and tighten this down. It's gonna save you some headaches, because these do loosen up and they can move, and it's gonna change your profile. And one last tip, this one is very useful. I have a magnet mounted light that I mount right to the back of the lathe. You want to make sure the cord stays out of the way of the wheels, obviously, but having a gooseneck light that I can bring around right to the point on the wheel where I'm sharpening is fabulous, because I can quickly see when I've removed enough material to create that sharp edge again. And remember, when we're sharpening, the only thing we're doing is cleaning up that outside bevel until it is smooth all the way up to the top where the cutting edge is. And once we're done that, we're ready to go back to the lathe and turn. That's all we're doing. And the great thing about this light, it helps you see that very clearly, quickly. So consider purchasing a light, a dedicated light, that's going to be right there to help you know when you have your tool properly sharpened. All right, guys, hopefully that answered a lot of questions you have about the one-way Wolverine sharpening system. And keep in mind, my tool sharpening and shaping, I say shaping because it's not really called that, but in that course, I'll teach you how to shape all the profiles that you've seen out there, the 40-40, a typical 45 fingernail grind, my 55-degree bevel favorite swept back. That's in there. I'll show you how to take a regular brand new bowl gouge that has no profile on it and how to shape it and make it the tool that you want it to be, plus all sorts of other profiles and all the other tools that you're going to need to sharpen. I'll show you how to do that in my tool sharpening course, so be sure to check that out. I'm sure you're going to have extra questions that perhaps I didn't address in this video, and that's great. Leave those in the comments below, please, and go down there and check out the answers that you see, and I'll try to get to as many of those as I can. Also, while you're down there, do me a favor and click that like button. Thank you, I greatly appreciate that. Be sure you're subscribing if you're not already, and go over to my website and check out turnwoodbowl.com. Over there I've got everything that you need to learn how to turn the bowls that you dream of, including courses, online courses that you can start right now. So check it out, turnwoodbowl.com. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time, happy turning.